welcome to Daily Debrief brought to you by People's Dispatch. I'm Pragya. We begin with Brazil, where Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva of the Workers' Party defeated rival Jair Bolsonaro on Sunday, October 30. Next, has Russia walked out of the so-called Black Sea Grain Initiative? Why and what it means? And the Under-17 Women's World Cup concluded in India with Spain the victors again. Stay with our guests and us today on Daily Debrief for all these stories. Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva crossed the magic halfway mark in a runoff vote held on Sunday in Brazil. The former president's victory is significant for not just Brazilians but the region and the world. The Workers' Party promises to undo drastic failures of the right-wing Jair Bolsonaro government, like fixing the weak healthcare system exposed during the COVID-19 pandemic. As welfare and food security return to focus, expect regional politics to change as well. Let's find out more. Right, Prashant. So, big comeback for Lula, big election result in Brazil. What's the likely outcome? What is the significance of this election?
Right. So, multiple, lot of aspects that are very significant actually. I mean, first of all, of course, at a very personal level, it's a massive comeback for Lula, who just a few years ago was in jail. His political career seemed doomed, and later, of course, he was charged with corruption. All those charges were later overturned in what is called lawfare right now. It's become an established term. But from there to reaching the presidency of Brazil during the time of this right-wing surge by Jair Bolsonaro, of course, a very significant achievement for Lula. It's a victory that is built on the backs of built on the back of shoulders of very powerful mass mobilization in which radical organizations, peasants' movements, trade unions, people's organizations, of every minority, of marginalized section, of the poorest, actually all came together in a rejection of Jair Bolsonaro's policies, his vision for Brazil. So, and that this, I think, Lula has pointed out time and again that he's not just an individual, but this campaign specifically bringing that aspect forward, that there was this collection of forces which propelled him to the position where he is, and there was a strong demand for that. So that is pretty much what has brought him here. Close victory, though. I mean, important to note, it's not as as clear as people had initially thought in the early days of the campaign. When Lula had first announced that he was standing, some of the numbers showed that he would win decisively. This was actually very, very close victory, a very narrow margin separating the two candidates. If you look at the electoral map, there's a very clear division between the north and the northeast, which was strongly pro-Lula, and the south and the southwest to some extent, which are very strongly Jair Bolsonaro. That continued the trends. Bolsonaro performing better than his first round victory, and even as better than a lot of what most other polls suggested also. So that trend also to some extent continues, though not as much as as in the first round. So all these important things to note, a very significant challenge for Lula. It's interesting again to note that in his very first speech, he made his priorities very clear. He was talking about a Brazil where people can eat, they can work, they can live peacefully. The very basic essentials of life, which under Jair Bolsonaro's time, in some senses, were affected very badly because of austerity policies, because of various other kinds of measures that Jair Bolsonaro's government undertook, and the COVID-19 pandemic, which is handled so badly. So Lula signified a return to those very basic necessities, which somehow don't seem basic in many parts of the world, because people think, we don't talk about hunger as much as we do. We don't talk about poverty as much as we do, except in documents by policy think tanks or the UN. So it's very, very essential, I think, that Lula has brought these issues to the focus. He struck a very an appeal for unity, saying that this is Brazil is one country. This is the election is over. Now we have to work together. So he's put forward that message. Now, of course, the fact remains that he's going to face a lot of obstacles. Let's be very clear about it. For instance, the fact that Parliament is still very strongly right-wing dominated. This election campaign, like the past many years, saw massive mobilization of the right-wing against Lula in person, against the Workers' Party, against progressive politics as a whole, because there was a lot of rumor mongering, fake news, allegations that were thrown against Lula and the masses that backed him. So it'll be a gigantic task to transcend some of these divisions, transcend this polarization for Lula. But I'm pretty sure he's going to try his best. So very interesting days that are set to come.
Right, Prashant. Prashant, also not just in Brazil, but there's a significance of this election beyond the borders of the country. So can you talk a bit about that?
Right. So with this, basically Brazil has also shifted to the left, you can say, and this marks a substantial change in how geopolitics is likely to happen. The exact concrete details we'll see in the coming days. The kind of foreign policy stances Lula takes, for instance, are yet to be completely clear. But right now, I think it would be accurate to say that this is a massive change as far as the
Right.
continent of Latin America is concerned. Now, people are calling back to a time period in the earlier part of the first decade of the century where there was this pink wave. Government after government in Latin America was run by leftists or progressives. Then there was a right-wing reaction, and for a while the pendulum had swung in the other way, and now it seems to have swung back a bit. Although it's very different from 2004 or 6 or 8 or whatever, because
Right.
those times were different, the economies were different, the challenges were different. Now it's it's a new era. So how these countries with governments that have some similarities and alignments in common position are going to work together is a very interesting question. A key question will be whether this will contribute to the strengthening of some of the regional organizations, which focus on, working together, on building capacities together, and do not involve bringing in the United States
Right.
as a key player in this region. So that was one of the key aspects of the policies Hugo Chavez, Nicolas Maduro later, and even Fidel Castro when he was alive, all of them really focused on. And some of these trade blocks that were built, governmental organizations that were formed, whether these will get strengthened will be one very key issue. Also interesting to note will be the kind of position Brazil takes on international organizations like BRICS, which,
Absolutely.
at that point, Brazil was a key driver of that forum. And after Lula and Dilma Rousseff, it actually kind of subsided as a key player internationally. So whether Brazil will play a much bigger role in that is also to be seen. Again, it will be important to see what Brazil's response on the Russia-Ukraine war is. But all these are very important interventions, and we need to see where Lula will go in the coming days. But I think it's definitely across the continent for progressive forces, for radical forces, for people's movements striving for change. There has been a definite. This victory will definitely serve as a morale booster. It will be an inspiration. We saw the same thing happen in Colombia a few months ago. Gustavo Petro
Absolutely.
coming to power in Colombia, which is the hub of U.S. intervention. So all this together, interesting moment geopolitically across the world right now.
Right, Prashant. Thanks a lot for joining us with that. Russia announced on Saturday it would leave a UN-backed deal to guarantee grain exports from the war zone in Ukraine. Grain is escorted through ports in the Black Sea as part of a UN arrangement. The announcement followed damage claimed by Russia to its naval ships in Crimea, but 12 grain-laden ships still left Ukrainian ports on Monday. This suggests Moscow is not stopping transportation of the grain. Russia's announcement that safe passage has become tough triggered concerns of hunger in the world. We talked to Abdul from People's Dispatch about this incident. Abdul, hi. Russia says that drone and air attacks have made it unsafe for passage of the grain ships. What's going on here?
As per the claims made by Russia on Saturday, around 14 drones attacked one of the ports in Crimea, which basically led to minor damages, of course, as per the Russian claims. But that basically Russia claims that this basically proves that Ukrainians are using the entire agreement which was signed under the UN mediation in July, UN and Turkish mediation in July, to launch attacks on Russia, which is unacceptable, and it basically questions the entire integrity of the deal itself and the parties who are involved with it. So that is the reason behind what Russia on Saturday announced suspension of its participation in the deal. As you rightly pointed out, there are ships leaving the port. It simply means that Russia, which had agreed in July not to attack those ships, or the reason through which the ships are passing, that guarantee is no more there. That's exactly what it means when Turkey also, which is one of the members of the entire deal, and which has the responsibility of monitoring the ships, whether those ships are indulged in some kind of smuggling of weapons or not, make sure and there is a coordination center in Turkey, based in Turkey, announced that Russian participation in that coordination team is still there.
Okay.
But that does not mean that Russia is agreeing with its commitments made in July. It means that until Russia expresses its adherence to the deal, there will be no formal passage of the ships through Turkish border. So by and large, it means that the attack on Saturday on Russian ships basically has provoked a kind of reaction from Russia against the deal.
What is the significance of Russia actually walking out of this deal or stopping the deal for now? What are the implications of this?
Well, there are two versions of it. If you see, Ukraine is one of the main exporters of grain, of course, after Russia. But the export from Russia is not stopped, of course. There is a separate reason behind it. There is a less export because of the sanctions imposed by European Union, US, and other its allies on Russian exports, and that's basically has reduced the exports from Russia. That is a separate thing. The Ukraine is second largest exporter of the grain, and because now there is Russia is saying that it is no more guaranteeing the security of the ships, it means that the export will halt. Now there are already questions about that, whether that export was helping the third world countries as it was stated at the time when the agreement was signed. Russia claims that in September, by the way, Putin announced that almost all the grain which is leaving the Ukrainian ports none of them are going to the African countries intended as it was intended earlier, the poorer countries, to help them, but most of them are going to European countries. On Sunday, the Russian ambassador to the US also quoted the similar figure and says that more than half of the grain which was allowed to move out of Ukrainian ports have basically landed in Europe. So it was not anyway helping the poorer countries as it was intended. Also, Russia claims that as per the original deal, the European countries and the US had agreed to lift the sanctions on Russian exports, wheat export, and its fertilizer export, which they have not moved ahead with. It means Russia was already in a disadvantaged position when it comes to the deal. So overall, basically, it may not have a larger impact on the third world countries as such, as against the claims made by US and European Union. As Ukrainian president claimed that this is an attempt by Russia to create a artificial famine in Africa.
Okay.
Russia says this is not true, of course, because anyways the grain was not going to African countries, it was going to European countries. So we have to look this picture in totality and the claims and counterclaims which are made. So it is not clear whether this will have any impact on the food situation in the larger world. But of course, it will impact the Europeans for sure.
All right, Abdul. Thanks a lot for joining us with that update. The Under-17 Women's World Cup, played in 3 Indian cities from October 11 to 30, concluded on Sunday. It ended with Spain winning the title a second time against Colombia, while the hosts India failed to clear the group stage after losing all their 3 matches. We talked to Siddhant Ane from NewsClick about what happened there. Right, Siddhant, good to have you here. Siddhant, so what's the significance of this just concluded match, these games?
Well, Pragya, thanks for having me. First of all, and from a biased sort of Indian perspective, I think one of the key points would be that it's the first time that a women's team of any age group or any sort has participated in a FIFA World Cup finals tournament, which means that India, being one of the largest, most populous countries in the world, almost 50% of the country is women. So it means a significant part of the world's population now has some at least history related to a FIFA World Cup. So it brings you into that larger conversation about what's happening in a sport that is played by perhaps more countries than are members of the United Nations. So that is significant. It's significant for India in, of course, multiple ways, but it's also significant because it once again allows us the opportunity to examine these mega events and the context in which they happen and the way in which they are conducted. Right. So, because they are now going outside of what might be considered regular footballing nations, even journalists, for example, in India now have a chance to see how the organization happens, the scale at which it happens, and how what sort of legacy it leaves behind in terms of the future impact. For example, the Secretary General of FIFA, Fatma Samura, who's the first woman to ever hold that position, was in India before the tournament launched. We had a chance to speak with her and listen to what she had to say and what her opinion was. And she focused a lot on legacy and bringing the game to as many girls as possible in India, right? And how this tournament as a showcase allows for some of that messaging to trickle down. Now, unfortunately, that is both, depending on where you're coming from, it either works or it doesn't work, or it works to a very limited extent. Yesterday was the final of this tournament, and Spain, congratulations to them. They played a great final against Colombia, and they won the tournament for the second time running. So they're defending champions and they held on to it. So obviously something is going right as far as Spain and women's football is concerned. But only 4,500 or so spectators visited or attended the final in person. Now, if you look at any kind of World Cup game of men or women at the senior level, you'll find thousands will attend at the stadium, millions will watch on television, etc., etc. So the point of having such a large-scale tournament at such a large-scale venue, a stadium that accommodates 40,000 people, hosts IPL matches and things like that, right? It kind of defeats the purpose of taking the sport to the ground level and helping or allowing young people to engage with it at a very direct and a very organic level. So it's more a spectacle than anything else. And at some sense, in some ways, I think FIFA needs to re-examine how it approaches age group tournaments, particularly in terms of where they are hosted and what community level engagement they end up creating. Beyond what, of course, FIFA does on its own social media platforms and other things like that.
Right. In fact, even when this tournament ended, then there was talk about like grassroots engagement, etc., etc. Now, the time for grassroots engagement was actually before or during the tournament. So, what do you think about that?
Yeah, absolutely, Pragya. So again, I'll stick to the Indian example because India was hosting this tournament. Now, after this tournament has started and now that it has finished, there's talk of starting a league where young girls get the opportunity to play on a regular basis, competitive football, whether it's regionally or whatever, at a scale bigger than they have been so far. Now, we have known that we are hosting this tournament for several years now. It's been delayed a couple of times because of the pandemic, etc., etc. So there were at least 5 years. Whenever a tournament like this is awarded, you have multiple years to prepare, right? And at the very least, when you're a debutant team, you're putting a team for the first time. Your players have never competed against the best in the world at this level. You want to also avoid having that kind of impact on them. Also, you have to remember that they are, of course, very young children. So with all of that in mind, I think we could have done a far better job of saying that, okay, we're going to do this 10 years from now. Let's start to put a structure in place at the grassroots or at the ground level today, and then build up so that our girls or the team that we present is also, they don't look like fish out of water. You know what I mean?
Right.
When you're playing against teams that have had far more sort of coaching, far more competition. Some of them, like, for example, India played against Brazil and the United States. Those girls have the opportunity to play 50 to 60 competitive games for their club teams every year. Whereas India's team, many of them maybe a year ago had not even played a proper organized game of football. So that is the sort of difference that exists. And when we talk about legacy and grassroots and all of that, these are great words to use. And I think people in power, I've heard For example, the current education minister talk of it, the sports minister talk of it, and how these programs are designed, or these events are designed to empower girls and women to sort of have equal platforms as men. But unfortunately, much of it ends up only being lip service and PR opportunities and optics. So it really needs to be, and I think the media plays a major part in it as well. They need to, we need to highlight systems and practices as they exist, beyond just when these tournaments happen and these blips or news trends occur.
Right. So true, not just for India, but for any country similar to it. And that's all we have for you today. Thank you for watching Daily Debrief. Do come back to us tomorrow. You can find more such stories on our website, peoplesdispatch.org, and look out for our regular updates on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.